One of the things, Richard, that you were initially optimistic about was the quote, tech right? And some of the more moderating influences, let's say, that you were praiseworthy of in the first administration. You did write an interesting piece. Can we put D1, please, up there on the screen, which I actually quite enjoyed. And it's called The Cat Turd to Silicon Valley Billionaire Pipeline Must Be Broken. Can you break down kind of this phenomenon where you observe that in your framework, elite human capital and or like people with skill sets and others who know better enter the Trump orbit and find themselves actually being brought down to the center of the gravity of the movement as opposed to raising the collective capacity of the entire movement?
So a few years ago, I wrote an article called Understanding the Tech Right, and I was the first person that I've seen use the phrase tech right. And this was at the beginning when people like Mark Andreessen and Elon Musk were really starting to take a public role as kind of more Republican-leaning figures. And I was optimistic at the time because, look, these were obviously smart, accomplished people. They've done a lot of things in their lives. I thought there was a human capital on the right. There's been a fleeing from the Republican Party in the Trump era of people who are college educated and people who are informed and connected to reality, frankly. And I thought that they would make things better. It was kind of the infusion of human capital that the right needed. Unfortunately, it hasn't really worked out that way. And just from watching these people and how they use Twitter, Musk particularly, but a lot of the other ones, you realize that as intelligent as they might be and as accomplished as they might be in the business world, they really have absorbed what's kind of swimming. They've imbued whatever is in the air in the conservative movement. And talking to these people, they often, they're so radicalized, I think, by what happened with COVID and what happened with wokeness and some of the personal coverage they received from people like Kara Swisher and the mainstream press, that they took a reaction that's understandable but was not the right way to go, which is that they shut out credible sources of information and they started just listening to Twitter anons. And so Elon Musk is sitting there all day, and I think he believes this stuff. I think he believes the stuff about massive voter fraud, flipping the election about without voter ID, our civilization is destroyed, and they're shipping in illegals to win elections, because this is what everyone around them and everyone who they trust at this point believes. The problem is the right as a whole, as smart as any individual is, none of us are that smart as an individual. We only have intelligence because we're part of a community, because we know what sources to trust, because we have conversations like this, because we read newspapers and talk to scientists and people in politics and people with sensible views on these things. So once you shut yourself out, it doesn't matter how high your IQ is, you can fall into social media radicalization, and you could have a worldview that just doesn't make sense. And I think we see that most clearly in what's happened with Doge. Look, I'm sympathetic to the idea of smaller government, sympathetic to the idea that government can be more efficient. There's people at places like AEI and Cato Institute, and if those are your goals, there are smart people you could find who will put you on the right path. And they've been thinking about this for a really long time. Elon Musk has not done this at all. He basically came in and said, it's going to be me and a few of my engineering buddies. And basically what the priorities in government should be, I'm just going to listen to kind of whatever's going viral on Twitter. And in the end, he's not going to save a fraction of the money that he saved. A lot of the stuff that they cut ended up being very valuable. Things like basic scientific research, things like getting statistics to make sure government does run more efficiently, stuff that doesn't cost that much and probably is some of the most cost-effective stuff in government you could do. But because the fact that he just has this simple idea, I'm going to cut government and not think about how or why, or I don't need to think about that, it's been a debacle. And I think we see that across the board with these guys when they're being part of politics, but also like they're swimming in the waters of the Trump movement.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, yes, in terms of their stated goals, it's been a disaster. Like he was originally, I'm going to cut $2 trillion. Now he's like meekly in the cabinet meeting like, I'm going to cut $150 billion, and even that's a freaking lie, right? On the other hand, he hates government, and government doesn't function now. Like Social Security, try to go to the Social Security office and see how that goes. The agencies that were regulating his businesses they've been defenestrated. Like, they will not be able to regulate his business, nor would they, because of, the massive corruption, conflicts of interest that are involved. So I think from his perspective, in certain ways, it was also a success. But Richard, I do want to ask you a little bit about your views. This is our first time having you on since you were, revealed your anonymous writings back in the day, which were, white nationalists, which you've disavowed. But I still do have some questions about your ideology that I wanted to, to hear from you on, especially when I hear you making the distinction between low human capital and elite human capital. It raises the question for me whether this is just some sort of eugenics ideology in another form. Like, you're no longer drawing the lines around like strictly IQ. You'd previously supported forced sterilization for people with low IQs. Previously you had an idea of different racial hierarchies in your head. Perhaps that's in the past, but is this just a new way to separate out which humans are worthy and which humans are unworthy?
So I will say that I did write some things that were very bad. I didn't straightforwardly advocating sterilizing people with low IQ. I said, here's an argument for it. Now I won't litigate it because it was all bad, and I just want to forget that stuff ever happened.
Okay, you said sterilization of the unfit is the only way to stop the decline of the West.
No, but it was a longer thing. Like, if you believe X, Y, Z. Anyways, whatever. Okay. It was terrible stuff. Everything I believed in 2011 is bad, regardless. But yeah, as far as the human capital stuff, look, there is. When I write about these things like the base ritual and I write about where the right has gone, I see myself from 12 years ago when I was an anonymous basement dweller writing these racist screeds. I've seen that person become the Republican Party. And I've kind of, if I'd stayed that person, maybe I would be in the administration at this point. But I changed, and I think it's horrifying. And I think I have some kind of insights into kind of what's going on here. And so the idea that human capital is kind of a variation of that, I'm not going to say that I'm not going to go in the other direction and say there's no such thing as intelligence. There is no such thing as.
Just to clarify.
Sure.
Human beings have differences, right? It's
sure.
fine to note those differences. Like, I have no problem with that. Where I have a problem is when you interpret those differences as meaning that different human beings get different rights. And that's really my question to you. And to me, that's sort of the foundation of like eugenicist type ideology, is like, well, we're going to decide these people are better than those people. And that means that those people that we decided are not as good, they're not going to get the same rights. They're not going to get to have the same say. They're not going to get to have children or whatever it is the program is that we decide for them. And, I think that type of ideology is very much how you end up, for example, cheering the, deportation to a slave labor camp of people that you've decided are unworthy of basic human rights. So that's my question for you is, do you still have that view that some people are less worthy of the same rights as other people?
I'm glad you asked the question in that way, Krystal, because I think you're right. I think that's the right thing to be concerned about. Do you go to a place where, look, there's one thing to analyze things and say, why does the right accept anti-vax arguments while the left does? And human capital is, I think, a way to understand that. The right is now less educated. They have all kinds of crazy ideas on all kinds of things. And you kind of need that analysis. You don't understand how anti-vax goes from a left-wing cause to something that's embraced by Republicans without understanding this, and RFK and his general crankery. Now, the question is, does that mean that low human capital, as we say, it's kind of a harsh term, and it's something that was built on Twitter, but let's say people with less cognitive capabilities or less education, do they deserve less rights? And no, I've stood against that. I mean, when I talk about Abrego Garcia, I know nothing about him personally. He may be a gang member. For all I know, he's not a Nobel Prize winning physicist or whatever, but his rights matter. And the rule of law matters. And the idea that we're all citizens equal before the government. I mean, he's not a citizen, but still there are some rules in how you treat people. Those are important principles to me. So I think that we have to create a space. I saw people on the Blue Sky trying to cancel Matt Yglesias the other day because he said some things where, I don't like to look into the origins of group differences, but I want to treat everyone equal, and we still should be concerned about racism, and we should have taboos against racism. All that stuff I agree with now, but they still wanted to cancel him because he kind of cryptically, according to Will Stancil and these people on Blue Sky, expressed a belief in group differences, according to them. And I think what we have to do is, yes, hold on to this idea that everyone has value, hold on to the idea of fair treatment and individual rights. And that's the important thing. That's how we don't go down the path of kind of where MAGA is going.
Got it. So Richard, to push you a little bit here then, I would would say it was pretty evident. If you're running many of the same circles I do. I knew a lot of these folks, and I knew that they were going to get into power. You were pretty well informed as well, and you still voted for Trump. So what's with the about face and this expectation? Despite the education, your own analysis, and all of this, in what way was this not all that expected in your vote and for the administration?
So I over-indexed, I think, on the first term. The first term was basically a normie Republican administration. I liked a lot of the policies. I thought they were going to do the things I advocated for on DEI issues. And then they appointed the Supreme Court justices that Trump appointed. That's really some of the only pushback that he's getting in the second administration. And so I was expecting something of a repeat. I knew that MAGA had changed. I knew that the Trump movement had become something different. But basically, I thought that we would get that. And then on the night of the election, I was on Destiny's live stream, and we share a negative view of RFK for his vaccine stance and basically everything else that he believes. And he said something along the lines of RFK will be HHS secretary, and I said no, RFK will not be HHS secretary. I actually put some money on it. I put my money where my mouth was. And I said, if he does, I might have said something as explicit as I will have made a mistake. And RFK does get appointed as HHS secretary. People around me are telling me these things, and we talk about kind of social circles. And everyone I talk to kind of thinks like I do. And so they're telling me, don't worry about RFK. They're going to put people around him. Peter Thiel, these bioaccelerationists, they're going to be his deputies and they're going to box him in. No, he's going after vaccines. He's doing everything that we thought. And I eventually stopped listening to these people. And, and then you had the tariff thing. Now, look, I'm in good company as far as the market goes. I mean, I believe in the wisdom of the market. All else equal, it's a good way to go. And people did not think the tariffs would be this bad. Trump was promising 10% across the board. People say, "Whoa, okay, that's the extreme end of what he might do." Instead, he comes out with this chart with this formula that makes no sense and has like 30-40% on different countries and 100-something percent on China. And so, I was expecting Republicans to push back a little. There was a little talk that they might not confirm RFK. There was talk that Bill Cassidy would vote against him, but they all kind of folded in line. And so, look, I misjudged this. I underestimated just kind of how much of a cult of personality it had become and how kind of unrestrained he is to indulge in his instincts. And a lot of these mistakes were understandable at the time, but they were mistakes. I saw this wrong.
What about the authoritarianism? Because we all lived through January 6th. You were talking earlier about how now it's a litmus test to get in the administration. You have to say not only did Trump win in 2020, won all 50 states this time around, all of those sorts of things. Like, it's just hard for me to imagine how that could be a surprise. Like, we've known this man even before the president. We've known him for years. He lies about everything. This, deep, racial and IQ view of the world has always been embedded in him. When he was when he was backed into a corner after he did lose in 2020, then his most authoritarian instincts come out. We knew in the interim, and you were a contributor to Project 2025, so you were directly involved in some of the planning that was done to make sure that all of the guardrails that were in place last time were completely stripped away. We knew the Supreme Court had also given him this sort of blanket immunity. So what about on that piece? Did you have any concerns going in about the likely suppression of free speech and authoritarian tactics and authoritarian tendencies that, even I have to admit, have gone even beyond what I expected? And I was pretty alarmist, I think the record will show, going into this administration.
Yeah, I've always taken January 6th seriously, and I've always taken the idea seriously that Trump did try to overturn the election in 2020. And I said he should have been in jail for it. I basically was the only person who probably endorsed Trump and thought he should have been in jail. At the same time, I can look back and say, well, it was a one-time thing. He can't run again. I was actually afraid he loses. He's going to be the Republican nominee every year for the rest of our lives. And well, he's still, Steve Bannon is going out there saying he's going to run for a third term. So maybe that didn't even take care of it. But
Yeah.
you're absolutely, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that, look, there's a lot of things that were totalitarian about the left, a lot of the speech restrictions, a lot of the COVID stuff. I think we still haven't had a full reckoning for what they were doing at the state level. And here in California, they were masking students, high school students outside for 3 years into 2022. I mean, it was really there was a kind of leftist authoritarianism too that's worth worrying about.
Sure.
But I agree with you that Trump is kind of just in his personal sort of disregard for any kind of concern with truth or constitutional norms. And so, yeah, it's something that's concerning. Look, like you said, we didn't think it was this bad. I don't think anyone said before the election that they're going to kick out foreign students for writing op-eds criticizing Israel.
I mean, I have
like
to
the
say,
terms.
like,
Yeah,
he
no,
was
he
using
kind of said
Palestinian
that.
as a
Yeah,
slur.
he
He was
said it.
saying that they were
He said he was going to deport foreign students.
He did.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's where that piece actually doesn't surprise me at all.
I agree.
Because he did advertise that he was ultimately going to do that. And I agree. I was a critic from the left of the excesses of wokeism and the authoritarian tendencies with regard to that. And, I think mistakes were made in COVID as well, even though I think, especially at the beginning, many of those mistakes were well-meaning and we didn't know what the deal was going to be with kids and schools and whatever. And the school closures were probably the biggest mistake that were made. People are being kidnapped off the street by masked officers of the state for writing op-eds. There's just no equivalent under a Democratic administration, in my opinion, to what we're seeing unfold under Trumpism 2.0.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you at all. I think that, my thinking, I'm trying to get back into my mind before the election.
No, I appreciate that.
But at this point, I think you're right. I think I can say that I'm not on the fence anymore. Like that stuff we complained about the left the other, last year or 2 years ago, that happened. It was bad. We can criticize them for it, but this is completely on a different level. And I think the thing we learned here is character matters a lot. What I talked about the Trump movement and it becoming a cult and the base ritual and kind of what I saw personally with these people who were in kind of Trump's orbit and who were going to probably be taking over the government. I should have taken that more seriously. I was just thinking kind of at a level of, okay, there's the Republican coalition, there's voters, there's the market checking him. There is kind of the Republican establishment, there are courts and so forth. I should have been thinking what kind of people are going to be staffing the government? And it's not just Trump. It's the fact that they're all Trumpists and true believing Trumpists at this point. And that was the mistake. I think these ideas that it's funny because conservatives, they have this thing about, virtue and leaders and how we've had a decline in morality. And it's not just, Chris Rufo was tweeting this the other day and I got an exchange with him. It's not just about IQ. You might say there's elite human capital, but there's wisdom and there's all, I'm like, but Donald Trump, it's just but Donald Trump. That's the only thing you could say to that. And it's kind of insane. There are arguments about character and civility and the need to pay attention to our inheritance and norms. All that stuff was right. They just became part of a cult of the man who is the antithesis of all of that. So it's a kind of remarkable dynamic.
Yeah, so let's return to Elon. We're both very curious about your take on this, Richard. Let's put D3 up there on the screen. This is some revelations about Elon and the way that he manages kind of his harem of young women, some of whom he's met on Twitter, often buying them off and encouraging them to have his children. Apparently, there's a known number of, 14 children, but it could be as high as 50. We were just curious, how does this fit into your elite human capital model here? Is this an example of elite human capital?
Right. Well, you're also a natalist,
yeah,
right?
You're a pro-natalist,
So
and this is a high IQ individual, and he's very rich. He's spreading his seed just like Genghis Khan or any other person with absolute power. So what do you make of this?
Look, yeah, you're right. On the surface, you might say, well, if you're a natalist and you believe in IQ, and I don't judge these things. If people want to have a lot of children, I generally think that's a great thing. I think that what we've seen is the kind of person who thinks like this. I'm just going to spread my seed to the greatest extent possible. There's somebody like Genghis Khan, prone to violence, or there's someone like Elon Musk who just kind of doesn't really have a moral sense. So I think this is the problem with, a lot of ideas might sound good in theory, but in practice, you have to kind of look at the kinds of people who are attracted to them and look at how these things work out in practice. And I think it's probably not a coincidence claims that the West had Christianity and a norm of monogamy and didn't think like this, and ended up creating the modern world. Yeah, I think it's a lesson here about taking starting with IQ natalism and not kind of thinking about character and what happens when you try to apply these ideas in a person's life.
Yeah, well, and it's not only that. I mean, he explicitly, according to the article, has told people that he's worried about the high birth rates in developing countries. And so he wants to combat that with his legion of, his high IQ, whatever, before the apocalypse. So, I mean, there's also these, directly, I would, again, say, eugenics-inspired ideas that come out here. So I don't know that he doesn't have an ideology, or I think you said moral compass or moral, I'm not sure the language that you used. But no, I think he does have an ideology, and it's a really evil one.
Yeah, I think he does have an ideology. I think he has kind of instincts and ideas about the world. Now, to be fair to him, I've never seen him say, we've got to limit the birth rate in developing countries or anything like that. But yeah, I think that his entire idea of, it's weird because you would think, well, somebody who's kind of an IQ snob, you might be like me, you might look down on kind of the conservative influencer space. But no, I mean, he will denounce the entire class of educated people and people who know anything about the world, but then love these people who are less intelligent, less honest because they all worship him, right? So there's this ideology, but at the same time, it's just kind of a classic kind of selfishness, big man behavior. And that's not socially conducive to anything good.
So how would you describe your political ideology now, Richard? Where do you kind of fit? How can people make sense of you?
The funny thing is, for all the things I've written and all the little bit of trolling I do online, I'm a pretty normie guy. I mean, the people I talk to these days are scholars at AEI or Cato, just like normal kind of libertarians who are concerned about norms and think the American experiment has been a good thing and we should try to preserve it, and caring about the well-functioning of institutions. So I'm a libertarianish classical liberal for all the kind of eccentricities that you see in the things I've written and the things I still write today. My politics underneath it all are actually sort of normal.
All right.
Well, I will say, I also have changed my mind on certain things because of this Trump administration. And one of them is something that you touched on, which is just how much character does matter. And, I think the liberals were right on certain aspects of Trump that I previously would have been like, who cares about the norms? And they're so obsessed with these different things about his personality or whatever. No, I think you're right. I think those things mattered a lot more than I gave them credit for mattering. And now that his personality traits have not only taken over the government, but I mean, the fish does rot from the head down. And that has to do not just with this administration, but with the whole country. And when you see the most powerful person in the country and in the world who is narcissistic, utterly shameless, lies, is cruel, etc., of course, you're going to have people think that that's the way to succeed, that those are traits that are worthy of emulation. And so I also, since you're talking about your evolution and your thought, I also have evolved in the way that I think about these things and have changed my mind about how important those things. In a certain way, it's made me sort of more conservative in that way of oh, you know what? Actually, the character of our leaders, these squishy traits and these norms, they actually did kind of matter, and I want them back.
See, it's interesting. I would almost do a reverse. I think, Richard, what you've convinced me most of all is that competence and elite human capital matters more than anything. And that, as you pointed out, let's say with the J.D. Vance tweet, right? You and I both know that is a straw man argument about deportation. That's not about Abrego Garcia in an El Salvadorian prison and defying a Supreme Court order. But that is one where somebody who has been through this process cannot debase themselves to actually argue at the level of drumpf, for lack of a better word, to be like, no, this is good, and we're also sending American citizens. And so, I mean, Richard, you've been through many things, but I'll say this, man, I've been reading you for probably 5 straight years. When's the first time we talked? 2020, I want to say, when you put out your CSPI study?
Yeah, after the report on the Working Class Coalition.
You were one of the first people who ever truly caused me to change my mind, and you have caused me to change my mind many of the times since. So we'll have a link down in the description to your Substack, and I will always read you. You're a fascinating man.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
Appreciate the
man.
discussion, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.